some of them as pleas. Did you get information about that?
I don't recall. I do recall there were people who certainly had weapons at the Capitol. That I recall with certainty, and there's people who used weapons, whether they be poles or sticks or other weapons, against police officers. I know there was one officer who they took his gun. And so the use of weapons against members of law enforcement, it was outrageous, but it figured heavily in what happened at the Capitol that day.
Thank you.
I'm actually, if you don't mind, I believe it's Exhibit 10. It's your volume 1 of your report. I think we entered it as an exhibit earlier, and I'm going to direct you to page 39 of your report. And I'm going to focus on the middle paragraph. There's 3 different paragraphs on this page. I'm going to focus on the middle one that starts with Mr. Trump's intent in spreading knowing falsehoods. Do you see that paragraph, Mr. Smith?
Yes, this was this paragraph was what I was referring to when I spoke earlier.
That's what I thought. Did President Trump ever acknowledge, and I believe you talk about it in this paragraph, but did President Trump ever acknowledge that he knew that he had actually lost the election of President Biden?
Yeah, so this paragraph references different statements that he made in the presence of other people. One is that it doesn't matter if you won or lost the election, you still fight like hell. And then the other was, can you believe I lost to this effing guy?
So,
Referring to Joe Biden.
so if this would have gone to a trial, and using your years of experience being a prosecutor and a trial attorney, how would you have argued this admission, Mr. Trump? Or how could you? What's a way you could have argued this admission for Mr. Trump to a jury?
Well, I think I saw these admissions as corroborative of the larger case. We would have presented what I viewed as very strong witnesses from each state to explain how the elections occurred in that state and why the events, the outcomes were trustworthy, and debunking various fraud claims that President Trump made. We would have presented the false claims that he made repeatedly, interspersed with debunkings to him or other evidence that showed they weren't true and that evidence got to him. This sort of evidence would corroborate that, but it would sort of be the cherry on top, if you will. The evidence that I felt was most powerful was the evidence that came from people in his own party who, as I said earlier, put country before party and were willing to tell the truth to him, even though it could mean trouble for them. I think witnesses like that, in my experience, would be very powerful witnesses in front of a jury, and this sort of evidence that you're pointing to here would be extra, but I think those other witnesses would be very strong proof.
And I want you to elaborate a little bit on that, on your experience with these types of witnesses. I'm assuming, individuals from the same party as Mr. Trump pushing back on his assertions of voter fraud and various other claims. Why would that, in your opinion, have been powerful to present to a jury?
Well, I think someone who puts country before party, I think my understanding of people, of jurors, that people appreciate that. I know I certainly do. The other part about that is the reality of, like, when people speak out against their political party, there can be costs. And when people are willing to pay those costs because they believe in something, because they're going to tell the truth, I think people get that. And I think the witnesses I'm talking about, if I had to cross-examine them and make them not look credible, that would be very hard. I think that would be a very hard assignment.
You mentioned just now, as part of your trial strategy would have been, having individuals from each state come up and talk about their experiences, pushing back on Mr. Trump's false claims about the election. And one of those states you mentioned earlier was Pennsylvania. And so I do want to give Ms. Scanlon from Pennsylvania a chance to ask a few questions.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here, and certainly we were paying very close attention to this whole process in Pennsylvania, since Pennsylvania was one of the main targets for the president's attempts to overturn the 2020 election. Can you just outline for us what actions President Trump, if any, took in Pennsylvania, a state that Joe Biden clearly won, in the 2020 presidential election, to overturn its results
Like the other 6 states involved, there were knowing false statements about fraud claims. You're testing my memory here, but one was, I remember there was a persistent claim that more people had voted than it had been given ballots. And it was a very clear thing that we were talking about 2 different elections. And there's email traffic among his staff and people who work for him about how obvious this wasn't true. And persistently kept making that statement over and over again. I also remember in Pennsylvania, the chair of the Republican Party in Pennsylvania, a guy by the name of, I think his name was Tabbas, very shortly after the election, this is in, I want to say, mid to early November, disabused President Trump of the idea that the reason his vote total, his lead was going down was because of fraud. And he explained again, that's how, we all knew that that's how this was going to work with absentee ballots in the state of Pennsylvania, which we had very strong evidence that Trump in fact had been briefed upon by his campaign staff. So those aren't the only examples, but they're the ones that come to mind as I sit here now.
You have a really good memory, but that first one you mentioned, the claim that there were more ballots being cast than had been issued, is one that some of our colleagues here have repeated, despite the fact that the entire state election apparatus has contested it for 5 years now. I think your report mentions the conversation that the president had with Larry Thomas, the chair of the Republican Party, in which he explained to him just a couple days after the election concluded why Pennsylvania's system had all these absentee ballots, which Democrats had embraced because the president had told Republicans not to use them. Did the fact that the chair of the Pennsylvania Republican Party told the president that there was nothing fraudulent about the fact that the Democrats' vote total was continuing to grow, did that stop the president from continuing his efforts to promote claims of voter fraud in Pennsylvania or elsewhere?
It did not, but again, that witness, Mr. Tabbas, was of a similar group of witnesses who, these are not enemies of the president, these are people in his party who supported him. And I think the fact that they were telling him these things would have had, in my view, would have had great weight and great credibility with the jury.
It's kind of the principle that we use in the law of an admission against interest. You know, when your party loyalty leads you to support the president, but instead you're saying no, he's wrong. You think that might give them credibility?
Yeah, I think witnesses of that nature would have had very strong credibility.
I agree. I know some of these folks. Did President Trump try to carry out his fraudulent elector plan in Pennsylvania as well?
Yes.
And how did he do this?
Well, what happened with the elector plan was when they came up with the idea of having these fake electors, there were certain electors who would just not put up with it. Thomas Marino, I think he was from Pennsylvania, is an example of that. And so as a result, and he wasn't the only one in the scheme generally, as a result they had to replace electors. And again, just to keep in mind, all the electors we're talking about here are people who supported Donald Trump. These are people who signed up and said, I want to be an elector for Donald Trump. And these people, when they stepped out, they had to replace them. And part of what's required under the Electoral Count Act is that there are procedures for doing that. And they couldn't follow those procedures because they were replacing people without the consent of the governor, things of that nature. Also in Pennsylvania, I believe it was Pennsylvania, there was a call where, and there's a text of this, where electors were pushing back on this and also wanting to be covered if there was liability and, you know, to be indemnified and things of that nature. And they wanted like statements in their certificates basically saying you're only going to use this if, you know, you win these lawsuits. And there was a text chain with some of the people who were carrying out this scheme for President Trump. Basically, it ended with these people should be shot because, and then we can't let this snowball like this, otherwise we're going to have to do this in all the other states.
I again, your recollection.
I'm sorry, I don't think you said these people should be shot. I think they said whoever put this slate together should be shot. I think that's what it said.
Well, I think it is one of the reasons the Pennsylvania fake electors didn't get prosecuted was because they pushed back and said, we're not going to sign this unless you include language saying that this will only be used if there are court cases say that we are the real electors. In your investigation, did you find that the people who were conspiring with the president to push this plan were telling electors one thing and then using their certificates in another way?
Yes, the electors were told that they would only be used in these circumstances, and as, you know, other ways of overturning the election fell away, and as President Trump and his co-conspirators became more desperate, they came up with even more obviously illegal ways to try to stay in power, and it eventually devolved to, let's just say that these are the electors, regardless of whether any court has said so, the governor has said so, the people of the state and most have said so, and they didn't go back to electors and say, hey, we're going to use your, I know we told you we were only going to use this if we won a lawsuit. They just went ahead and used it. And I think, again, even among the fake electors, there would have been witnesses. I'm thinking of one witness in particular in Georgia who I thought would have been very powerful of, I would never have done this if I thought they were going to use my name to overturn the will of the people just because one person said so.
Okay, I mean, there were other efforts in Pennsylvania. We had the very famous Four Seasons Landscape Day press conference, which is famous to this day. But there was also a meeting that Pennsylvania State Senator Doug Mastriano hosted in a hotel in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania around Thanksgiving weekend. So, between the certification in Pennsylvania and the presentation of the electors in DC. So even though it was framed as a hearing, Giuliani attended that event and ended up speaking to promote some of these falsehoods about election fraud or wasting votes or whatever, and made it sort of a rally. Donald Trump even called into this event and claimed that he had won Pennsylvania by a lot. Are you familiar with that event?
I do recall that. I think that's in our final report.
I believe so, yes. Did you uncover anything in connection with that event with respect to what they were trying to do with Pennsylvania votes?
Well, I think they were calling them hotel hearings, and it's because they couldn't have hearings actually in the legislature, and so I don't think Pennsylvania was the only state where that happened. There's obviously nothing illegal about having a political rally or having a meeting of people of one political party. Our case was about knowingly false fraud claims.
Right, yeah, it did appear to be more just some of the kind of performative stuff that we see here where they try to make something out of nothing. Well, I want to thank you for your testimony, for your work, for your integrity, and that of your entire staff, who I know worked extremely hard and with great integrity. And wholly support your request to testify before the American people. I would really like to see that. Americans' tax dollars, including my constituents, have funded your investigation, and I think that they should hear from you directly about what you found and not have your testimony hidden from them. So, thank you.
On another state, on November 20th, Mr. Trump called Republican legislators from Michigan to the White House and urged them to remove the Biden electors and replace them with electors that would elect Trump. They, subsequent to that, made a statement that there was no evidence for that and went back, and the electors were certified as the votes had indicated they should be. Subsequent to that, in December, there was an effort to create fake electors. And in fact, on December 14th, when the electoral colleges meet in all the state legislatures, there were